Ladies and gentlemen, if motorcycles were cocktails, most post-war British bikes were warm pints of bitter. But the Vincent Series C Black Shadow? That was a double espresso martini with a dash of nitroglycerin. I believe it still gives goosebumps to anyone who's ever seen its black-enameled engine glinting under the sun. Today on Timmy Tiny Wheels, we're unwrapping one of the most myth-loaded machines ever to thunder out of England, a bike so fast the factory printed 150 miles per hour on the speedometer just to scare the neighbours. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button the way you'd hit the starter on a cold morning in Hertfordshire. Firm, committed, maybe a little nervous. More weird, rare and outrageous vehicles are waiting for you right here. Now let's rewind to 1948. Britain's roads were still cratered, petrol was rationed, and yet riders craved speed like my friend Tony craves free Wi-Fi at the pub. In Stevenage, Hertfordshire, a small firm called Vincent HRD, later Vincent Engineers Limited, was building the two-wheeled equivalent of Spitfires for the road. Company founder Philip C. Vincent and his chief engineer Phil Irving had already stunned the world with the Rapide. But the post-war audience wanted even more performance, more exclusivity, and something to make Triumph owners choke on their tea. Vincent had already made waves with their Series B machines, which dared to use the engine as a structural member. Basically, let's make the motor carry the bike. For the Series C, they doubled down on innovation and fitted it with the now famous Girdraulic fork. It wasn't just a bike, it was a declaration of war on slowness. The Series C Black Shadow wasn't for the milk run crowd. It was Vincent's answer to the growing demand for speed among post-war sports riders. These were folks with cash in their pocket, oil in their hair, and a dream of going very fast while looking very cool. The Black Shadow gave them all that, with more engineering per square inch than your average fighter plane. At a time when most motorcycles were lucky to hit 80 miles per hour with a tailwind and a prayer, the Shadow promised 120. It was the halo bike, the one you bragged about if your friend's dad knew a guy who owned one. Of course, Britain's tax system was about as forgiving as a vengeful ex, and motorcycles like the Shadow were heavily taxed at home. But in the export market, especially the speed-obsessed United States, the Black Shadow found a cult following. Production ran from 1948 to mid-1954, just before Vincent motorcycle production ended entirely in 1955. It's like throwing a rock concert and shutting it down right before the encore. Now, if we're talking numbers, roughly 1,700 Black Shadows were produced across all series, with the majority being Series C. No one kept perfect score, probably because they were too busy going fast, but the Vincent Owners Club keeps many of them alive today, thanks to their fanatical devotion and a parts ecosystem more detailed than a tax audit. Let's pop the hood, well, the valve covers on the Series C. Powering this beast was a 998cc 50-degree overhead valve V-twin featuring high-mounted camshafts, 2 AML carburetors, and a typical compression ratio of 7.3 to 1. All told, you got about 55 brake horsepower at 5,700 revolutions per minute. That might not sound like much today, but in 1950, that was like strapping a rocket to your trench coat. The transmission was a 4-speed unit integrated into the engine cases, with the whole engine gearbox combo serving as part of the bike's frame. This wasn't your uncle's bolt-on special. This was a monolithic piece of mechanical genius. Primary drive came via chain to a Vincent multiplate clutch, and final drive was another chain out back. And yes, the Shadow got a taller first gear, a true test of whether your knees had enough forgiveness to launch like a proper gentleman. Now onto suspension. Up front, we had the Girdraulic fork, a Vincent-patented oil-damped girder fork that blended the best of girder and telescopic technology. Out back, a cantilever swing arm with spring boxes, a concept so ahead of its time, most rivals were still putting leaf springs under the seat. Braking was handled by twin 7-inch. Drum brakes front and rear, 2 drums per wheel, giving you serious stopping power by the standards of the day. The wheels were a 20-inch front and 19-inch rear, wearing road rubber that whimpered if you got greedy with the throttle. The dimensions? Wheelbase was about 56.5 inches, 135 millimeters, and dry weight came in at just 458 pounds, 28 kilograms. That's lean for a litre-class bike, and it made the Shadow feel agile, like a ballroom dancer in a leather jacket. Top speed was rated around 125 miles per hour, 201 kilometers per hour. And if you kept your right hand in check, fuel economy hovered around 55 to 65 miles per imperial gallon. That's about 5.4 litres per 100 kilometers, assuming you weren't using it to outrun traffic cops. One of the standout engineering features, aside from using the engine as part of the frame, was the UFM and RFM structure, upper frame member and rear frame member respectively. The UFM doubled as the oil tank, while the RFM was detachable. Lightweight, rigid and brilliantly compact, it made the Shadow feel like a mechanical scalpel. Sharp, precise, and just a little scary. And we can't forget the serviceability. The Shadow was built by engineers who apparently thought, what if we made a motorcycle that even a bloke with a decent toolkit and a bit of whiskey could fix on a Sunday? Quickly, detachable wheels, adjustable everything, and a layout that respected the home mechanic. I think that's what I liked the most. It respected your brain, your hands, and your need for speed. Design-wise, the Black Shadow was less a motorcycle and more a piece of mechanical theatre. Dressed in black enamel from head to tail, it practically glared at lesser machines. I believe the most iconic visual was that Smith's 150 miles per hour speedometer, the size of a dinner plate, smack in the middle of the bars. Was it optimistic? Probably. Was it awesome? Absolutely. Most people didn't need a Speedo that went to 150, but Vincent wasn't building bikes for most people. They were building for lunatics, visionaries, and weekend daredevils with clean boots and wild eyes. So, how did the Shadow stack up against the competition? Well, in the early 1950s, most motorcycles that claimed to be fast were whispering in the neighborhood of 90 miles per hour. The Black Shadow stomped into the pub and ordered a double at 120. Against other British bikes, like BSA's Gold Star or Norton's Dominator, it wasn't just quicker, it was decades ahead in engineering. Over in Germany, BMW's touring boxers didn't stand a chance. And in the States? Well, Harley was still figuring out rear suspension. Speaking of legends, let's clear up the record. The famous 1948 Bonneville run, where a man in a bathing suit hit 150 miles per hour, was on a Black Lightning, not a Shadow. But that didn't stop Vincent from printing world's fastest standard motorcycle in every ad, catalogue, and probably on the toilet paper. And they weren't far off. The Shadow set 8 world endurance records at Montlhéry, including multi-hour averages over 100 miles per hour. You name another production bike doing that in 49, I'll wait. There was even a variant called the White Shadow, with polished alloy instead of black enamel on the engine cases. Only a few were built, and today they sell for kidney-level prices. If you see one at auction, don't blink, because you just missed your mortgage payment. Now, let's talk coin. Back in the early 1950s, a Black Shadow cost around $1,200 in the United States. That's roughly $4,500 to $16,000 in today's money. In Britain, it sat in the high £400, including tax, putting it out of reach for most working blokes. But here's the kicker. In April 2021, a 1953 Series C Black Shadow sold for $165,000 at auction. Yep. From $1,200 to 6 figures, faster than most stock portfolios. Other notables, a 1949 model fetched $93,500 in 2008, and a 1954 version brought $125,000 at Bonham Stafford in 2016. So if your granddad had one rusting in a shed, congratulations, you may already be wealthier than your neighbor with 5 crypto wallets. And now, a little Timmy wisdom before you go. If you ever feel like modern bikes are just apps with wheels, go find a Vincent Black Shadow, stare at it for a minute and remind yourself speed used to come with soul, oil stains and actual danger. That's real romance on 2 wheels.